Golden brown texture like sun lays me down. With my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown with golden brown. Every time, just like the last, on her ship, tied to the mast, to distant land.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly outside the city of Little Port-au-Prince, Ohio, the city formerly known as Springfield, Ohio, the place where they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Anyhow, folks, once again, Double J, your host here this evening. I will be your pilot and navigator for this shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And I got a real barn burner here on deck for you folks tonight. Manson Family style murders, Parapolitics in the Idaho 4 case. So I understand that statement and title may sound a bit wild to folks, and I agree. My first response and inclination to hearing such a statement was, well, that sounds weird. What's the connection there? So I'll hopefully you folks of the interwebs will appreciate the journey I'm going to take you on here to, and my thought processes and how I landed here with the title here, Manson Family Style Murders, Parapolitics in the Idaho 4. So it's an interesting tale that was really tipped off to me by folk of the interwebs, leaving a comment on previous Idaho 4 show that I did a couple weeks back and advising me that I needed to listen to a podcast interview with an Idaho State police detective by the name of Victoria Gooch, aka the Gooch. And she's a long time member of the Idaho law enforcement and nearly 20-year member of the Idaho State Police. So major crimes detective, interesting character. We've only learned recently, you might be asking yourself, what's the Gooch have to do with things here? Well, recently we've discovered via court releases in January, transcripts from the January hearing that were unredacted and released in February, I think on or about February 17th or 21st, and then March 17th, another, redacted transcript of a hearing. So in these redacted transcripts, we're learning, unredacted now, we're learning that this Detective Gooch played an integral role in not only the investigative genealogy investigation that apparently led to Kohberger, despite the sheer lack of evidence of their process in which to accomplish this task, but she was a very integral party in that, by the admissions in court recently. Like I said, recent discoveries. I hadn't heard of the name of the Gooch prior to these recent releases. And then in March 17th, we understand now that she was the Idaho State Police detective, along with then Sergeant Blaker of Moscow PD, questioning surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, in the days after the murders there on 11/13/2022. So, which the date of that's always seemed strange to me when you compare 11/13/2022 or 11/12, depending on when you want to infer the crime occurred, since Kathy Mabutt is lost out to lunch concerning her statements in regards to when the crime occurred and her actual report of when she published the pronounced time of death on November 17th. She republished a report saying the pronounced time of death was noon. However, she would conflict those statements by saying she wasn't allowed in the crime scene until 5 or 5:30. So do with that what you will, folks of the interwebs. What I'm saying is just weird. The 11/22 King Road and the 11/12/2022 date of death, or 11/13/2022. Still strange either way. Nonetheless, Detective Gooch here plays a very important role, and it was that message to listen to this interview where I discovered that her father, Detective Gooch, that is, her father was a military intelligence officer and protege of Colonel Paul Tate. Now, for those folks familiar with the Manson family murders, Sharon Tate, actress Sharon Tate, was one of the victims at the Tate Polanski home, the place she shared with her husband, Roman Polanski, film director, ardent pedophile, and currently on the run, on the lam, if you will, from federal U.S. authorities in regards to a warrant for raping a 13-year-old on Jack Nicholson's couch back in 1977, where in which old cocaine Bob Evans, one of my favorite characters to talk about in life, he came in with the cleanup crew, and Detective Philip Van Adder would be the one that would initially arrest Polanski for these charges before Polanski would then later flee, upon getting bail. So, and Van Adder, he plays in the OJ case heavily as one of the lead detectives. I highly recommend folks to check out my comparisons of the OJ case and the Idaho 4 case, because there's a lot with that too in those comparisons. Not only the characters, some of the characters involved, be it Mark Fuhrman, who's always putting himself on the TV to talk how Bryan Kohberger is guilty. This is a man who literally was terminated from Los Angeles PD. I mean, they let him retire, but in the wake of the OJ trial, because he perjured himself in the trial, planted evidence, perjured himself about planting evidence, pled the fifth in which to do so in trial. The jury never heard any of this stuff. And also the Internal Affairs Department of LAPD had just published a 40-page, I think 42-page report stating how big of a Nazi Fuhrman was. And even OJ's book, OJ's attorney, Johnny Cochran, would cite some of that stuff in his book after the trial, how Fuhrman would apparently wear Nazi insignia under the the lapel of his LAPD uniform while on duty. So again, why this dude? And no one asked him about being a felon, perjuries, or his Nazi nature, or the fact that he's been long connected to a Nazi, a white nationalist terrorist group out of Sandpoint, Idaho, where today Mark Fuhrman lives and has lived since 1995 or 96 when he left LAPD. But back in 1984, that same group that he was connected to, apparently dating back to the 80s, was responsible for a nationwide series of robberies and a murder of a Denver, Colorado radio talk show host, Alan Berg. This has been made into a number of films, including the recent Hollywood film, The Order. That was the name of the white nationalist group that Fuhrman had connections to up there in Sandpoint. And this is back in the 80s. So nonetheless, strange set of characters that come out in this whole Idaho 4 case. And Fuhrman's certainly one of them who doesn't have to answer any questions about things. And again, Fuhrman's buddy on the case there with OJ, Van Adder, was, deeped in these process Manson family crimes of the LA region, because Van Adder was on scene at that Tate Polanski home as a rookie officer with LAPD back in 1969 when Sharon Tate, the actress, was murdered. Now, this was the Manson family. What the story really isn't told is this was all a process church drug trafficking related crimes, right? So the individuals surrounding these circumstances were all process church members, be it Sharon Tate, be it her husband, Roman Polanski, or the fellow that introduced them, Cocaine Bob Evans, legendary film producer and a very close friend of Polanski. He hired Polanski to do Rosemary's Baby, that Satan's shitstorm of a movie that, from the late 60s there. That was their first number there at Paramount together. So a lot of connections there with the process. So when I see these elements of the drug trafficking stuff going on with the Greek organizations, and then I see, suddenly I'm cued into, characters at least tertiarily connected to such, infamous process murder, drug trafficking situations as the Manson family murders, and once again, Manson himself deep in the process church hierarchy. They highlighted him in numerous magazines there and publications. I believe it was their death issue of their process church magazine. However, Charlie would famously say that in regards to the leader of the process, Robert de Grimston, he would famously say that Robert de Grimston and himself were the same. So what that means, I think he's in crazy Chuck language, is he's trying to say that he's high up in the process, right? He's a firm Scientologist. The process, breaks off from Scientology there in the early 60s. This fellow, Robert de Grimston, and his wife were the leaders. De Grimston being a close associate of Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard, there in London at the time, where Hubbard lived and was running Scientology. So, lot to be said there. I've done a lot of stuff on that. If folks want to check out some more of those backstories, got a number of shows there. So the fact that this whole, it was the drug trafficking, the Manson family, connections to the murders, right, with Sharon Tate's father's kind of protege, military intelligence protege, being so intricately involved in this case, right? So that was interesting, So I kind of looked further into that narrative, and I discovered there was an article written back on December 26th of 2022, and it's a Globe article, a periodical, a tabloid. They're out of the United Kingdom, and while I will admit tabloids are very tabloidy, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathtub. Because could share a quick brief story with you folks of the interwebs. I actually learned about a very gruesome kid diddling homicidal cannibal via, I learned about the story despite living in the town this all occurred in. I learned about the story from the Weekly World News. So I'm standing this is back in June of 2001. I'm standing in the grocery store line at a grocery store in Great Falls, Montana, where I was stationed in the U.S. Air Force. I just got back from deployment from Saudi Arabia. And so, I was this is, pre-social media interweb situation. So I was somewhat disconnected, I suppose, from news or, society at large in America for the previous 4 months. However, I didn't expect to stumble across such a crazy tale of this fella Nathaniel Barjona. So I'm standing in the grocery store line and waiting on the register there, and I see the Weekly World News, and it says, Montana man murders a boy and serves him up at church barbecue. And I'm like, what the fuck? I obviously immediately grabbed the Weekly World News. Probably the first time I ever did that, other than to laugh at Bat Boy, their little mascot there. That's always a, funny story, whatever they got Bat Boy into. But I never previously to this date had never taken Weekly World News as a serious source of information. So I continue to find this article there from the front page, big front page picture of the situation on the cover, and it says Great Falls, Montana is location. They're at the top of the news story, the news story, right, in the Weekly World News. So I'm reading, and I'm like, well, no shit, I'm in Great Falls, Montana right now as I'm reading this. How the hell do I not know about this situation of this kid diddling, cannibalistic, serial killer dude who's serving up his victims at church barbecues? Sure as shit, I get into reading it more, and I verify some of the details in the aftermath of reading this that day, and amongst the townsfolk, the townies, and some of my Air Force people as well, but who had not been disconnected for the last 4 months. And apparently while I was gone, this dude got busted. He Nathaniel Barjona was his name. He changed his name after he was convicted of kid diddling in Massachusetts. Somehow got a job in Great Falls, Montana, as a janitor of a elementary school. It's fucking pretty gross. Apparently victimized one of his victims. At least one of his victims was the one they got him for. He was later murdered in prison shortly after conviction. But one of his victims apparently was, from the elementary school. So they didn't really do much of a background check on this guy, is what I'm saying. Late 90s isn't like, that ain't the 1950s or 40s. They could have made a phone call, they hired a guy. They didn't realize he changed his name to avoid, being found out as a convicted diddler. I mean, I don't buy the tale, but nonetheless. So apparently this fellow was also murdering other folks, and he worked at the Hardy's restaurant down on Central Avenue in late night. And I didn't always eat at the Hardee's on Central Avenue, but when I did, it was on the late night. So there's a very good opportunity, very good chance that I consumed a human meat burger served up by Nathaniel Barjona from a Hardee's in Great Falls, Montana, back in late 2000. Anyhow, Weekly World News article, actual real world stuff there in the case of Nathaniel Barjona. Whether or not that applies to this one here, I don't know, but I do ask folks to consider that this may not just be complete nonsense. Idaho bloodbath tied to new Manson cult, says the Globe article. So when I discovered this, and they cite some sources, some unnamed law enforcement, a retired Chicago, I believe a captain from Chicago PD turned private detective. He's quoted in here as well. It's interesting. So this was I discovered this after the whole the Gooch situation. So and while we're on that topic, before we go any further down this Manson family tale, let's hear it from Vicky Gooch herself. So like I said, Vicky Gooch, very integral. We learned in January or February from the January hearing that big time into the IGG investigation, contacting quote unquote Kohberger's relatives to do the IGG investigation. We don't know the ins and the outs of it yet, but and I'll read some of those statements here in a bit. But what we do know, but it is interesting. We're just now learning about the Gooch, so that almost makes me feel like she plays a more important role behind the scenes. And when we learned in March that she's the one questioning Dylan Mortensen on what we now know are false narratives, and we'll go over those statements as well, right? The whole "I was asleep" situation, right? So these are the statements that are quoted from that interview with Gooch and Dylan Mortensen back in December 2022. Shortly before this article was published, probably. I forget the exact date, but anyhow, Victoria Gooch. Don't take my word for it. Sure, take her word for it. Her father worked for Colonel Paul Tate in around the time of the Tate murders. And I'll get into that after we listen to this clip of why that's important, the time frame in which he worked for him and was, by all appearances, his protege, because it sounds like they traveled to numerous locations together within assignments within the military U.S. Army intelligence network here. But here's Vicky Gooch.
Interesting. When you're obviously parents are from Greece, moved to the Bay Area, dad was in the military. Would you consider your parents conservative, liberal? How was that growing up in the Bay Area at the time?
They're very conservative. This is what moved us to Idaho. My dad's boss was Sharon Tate's father. He had been a colonel in the Army, and he was running the unit my dad worked for, both in retirement. And when Sharon Tate got murdered, and then I'm certain this is a joke in the family that my dad saw some kid smoking a doobie on the street corner where we lived. He said, "California's gone to hell and we're moving." So I think really what the impetus for my dad was the Sharon Tate connection. My siblings had graduated high school from the.
So you heard there, folks, old Vicky Gooch describing that herself. I'll play another clip here later where she's describing how that Sharon Tate murder was basically the defining moment in her life, contingent upon her ability to go back to school at Berkeley, where she got a scholarship. So, University of California, Berkeley, that is. So her father would not let her go. She's now 60 years old, and this is still a chip on her shoulder, apparently. So the fact that again, this is how I got down in discovering this article about the Globe article. Then so once I discovered this Globe article saying, let me read some of that here for you folks. The Idaho bloodbath tied to new Manson cult. Co-ed killings mimic 1969 murders by Charles' evil family. Now, and speaking of family, I don't mean to speak ill of my family, but me and old Chuck there were Maynards from Pikeville, Kentucky. So, I'm only gonna, I think I have a lot of thoughts about who he was and what he did, and none of them are good, right? None of them are good. But the one thing I think is to be noted that he was never at this crime scene. So that's another element I think that's imperative in the story of old Charles Manson, because he, was convicted of these murders while never physically being at the murders or doing the murders. It was a mind control, right? He's basically convicted for mind control, which is interesting. But nonetheless, that whole trial was a different circus. But nonetheless, the to a certain extent, I think it is these blood. What I'm getting at with him being a Maynard is, I do think it's to an extent these bloodlines that that folks get involved in these cults, and some of the victims in the Manson family cult exhibit that same kind of quote unquote blue blood heritage, right? So the folks in the Idaho 4 case do as well, including Vicky Gooch's husband. So Vicky Gooch's husband is a Gooch from the Plymouth Gooches, Plymouth, Massachusetts, Mayflower Gooches, if you will, and they moved out west courtesy of being early Mormons and joining the Mormon pioneer trains out west. So I think that is kind of interesting in regards to, again, just it's one pattern I see with around all these kind of circumstances with high profile murders, drug trafficking, money laundering. The spooky nature of all these activities seems to also, spooky nature. Paul Tate, right? Gooch's dad, right? Spooks, U.S. Army intel spooks. It's these things that all revolve around these quote unquote blue blood families as well. So, but yeah, Gooch's husband, a pioneering Mormon family, which is, again, kind of interesting when you look at other characters in the story, like Dylan Mortensen, right? So Dylan Mortensen, of the Mortensen, long line of Mortensen men who all served missions for the Mormon Church. They were missionaries, and dating back to we got it here somewhere, 1850, I believe, is when the Peter Mortensen. This is the official church historical database here for their early church, folks, early Mormon folks. So Peter Mortensen, I believe he migrated here from Denmark, circa 1850, when he got that's right. The Mormons sent over Brigham Young sent over some missionaries to Denmark in 1850. He was one of their first recruits, and he came over here and did some pioneering wagon trains. I don't think that it's possible that the Mortensens there cross paths with the Gooches. I'm not going to say it's impossible. There's an area of in Nebraska. There's an instance in Nebraska there in the late 19th century on the way out west and whatnot, or I believe it was around mid 19th century, disregard, where it seems that these folks may have crossed paths. Nonetheless, it is interesting to note that these are the blue blood kind of things circling around this. Again, the Tates would fall in the same category. The victims in the Manson family murders, Abigail Folger, she's a OG Massachusetts colony family, the Folgers coffee people. Ben Franklin would be out of the Folger family. His grandfather, I believe it was, or great grandfather, was the founding Folger here in America. And so you have these, even amongst the victim class, right, of the Manson family murders, you have that same kind of blue blood nature. Whether or not there's something to it or not, it seems to be odd to me that these things all seem to circulate around some of the families that started this place. You know what I mean? So it's also odd to me when we learn that Detective Gooch is interviewing Dylan Mortensen, right? So while we're on that note, we'll jump over to that. So it was actually 4 days after the murders we found out that Detective Gooch interviewed Dylan Mortensen. So let me pull this up here. So this was released back on this is the release from March 17th. We learned that, disregard, March 17th. And Detective Gooch, let's see here. Nope, went too far. Yeah, 4 days later on November 17th, 2022, DM was interviewed by Idaho State Police Detective Victoria Gooch. And then Sergeant, at the time of this, Captain, now I believe he's the police chief, Dustin Blaker. DM gave detailed recounting of what she did on Saturday, November 12th, 2022. So this goes on to discuss how sometime between 4 a.m. and 4:20 a.m., DM woke up and heard a male's voice, and a voice she did not recognize. I'm okay. I'm going to help you. So these statements, we were familiar with those statements of Dylan's statements, right, from the probable cause affidavit, right, written by Brett Payne, released back on or about January 6th. However, we didn't know about Victoria Gooch here being involved in this discussion. So I make that point to say, well, if there is more to these Mormon things, these blue blood natures, and potentially even these cult crime aspects, like the Manson family murders, into this whole narrative. Well, isn't it odd that you have these pioneering Mormon families here linking up for this police interview? Detective Gooch and Dylan Mortensen being both her husband being the descendant of a long pioneering Mormon family out west there, and again, Dylan being the descendant of another. So again, not, take for it what you will. It seems to be an odd pattern that continues to circle around these, not just this case, but again, the Manson family murders, right? So the first time we heard Detective Gooch's name, though, was, let me pull that up here, was back in February 17th, February 21st. And that was this one right here. And that was when the ISP criminal lab director, right? I believe his name is Gamut. He is the, that's Gooch. Yeah, Matthew Gamet. He was the ISP lab director. Get you his official title here. He is the, well, he didn't want to give us a title here, does he? He's the lab director for ISP forensics. So he testified in regarding to the DNA stuff back in the Franks hearing back in January. This is the unredacted transcript of that. So, and he's testifying here, after you did the cursory work in the family tree, what was the next thing you did in relation to these four brothers? Now, these are the four brothers here. Let me scroll back up. They're talking about the IGG investigation, right? This is the key to the entire case, right? The IGG investigation. So they're questioning the director in regards to their processes. And that's when we learned, well, they didn't have a lot of records. They didn't really keep a lot of records in these processes, right? The chain of custody is in question. The lab activities are in question because some of the technicians apparently discarded their notes, we learned. But apparently Detective Gooch's role in this mess, this whole boondoggle surrounding the IGG investigation, well, that's you're tracking these apparent, this apparent kinfolk of Bryan Kohberger that were identified in essentially the reverse engineering of the quote unquote alleged DNA sample they found on the alleged knife sheath, and then backtracking that to allegedly find Kohberger. And there's these four brothers they identified. Apparently, they don't specify, after you did the cursory work in the family tree, what was the next thing you did in relation to these four brothers, but they don't ever specify the actual brothers' names. So, the question before that was, now I know you said you can't remember the last name of those brothers. So they're testifying in the court hearing that they can't remember the names of these people that they allegedly did this investigation off of to land at Bryan Kohberger. Says, we're here today and Bryan Kohberger's name has been on the news for 2 years. You know his name. That wasn't the last name. And then the answer was from the lab director, that was not the last name. So, to the extent of who these brothers are, it's unclear still, right? They're not telling us that in this unredacted transcript. They're not letting us know. Well, I mean, apparently they kept the chain of custody is in question. They didn't have elements to prove the chain of custody. Again, lab technicians apparently discarded their work. The lab director, who's apparently involved in the investigation, along with Detective Gooch here, he can't even tell you the last name of these people in this sworn under oath in this court hearing. So take that for what you will in this case against Kohberger. But yeah, here it says after they the next thing that they did was, we at some point, and I don't remember exactly when, we had asked our investigator, Detective Vicky Gooch with the Idaho State Police, to reach out to one of the brothers we believe we believe had put information into a genealogical database. Ask him if he would be willing to upload that into one of these other databases so they could further build out and use that information. Now, based upon hearings that occurred back in August of 2023, that makes no sense, because if folks recall, there was all these questions surrounding the violation of these terms of service agreements with sites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, which apparently you not only can not subject to law enforcement, those companies just won't participate, right? It's GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA. These are the ones you can opt in and opt out of, right? But not these other ones. So apparently these other ones seems to have been accessed. Not only do they seem to have been accessed, based upon what was kind of argued out in the public forum there in those hearings in August of 2023, this is shortly before the FBI would threaten one of the DNA experts at their home, knock on the door. Hey, we heard you wanted to change your story. Yeah, someone from your field emailed the prosecutor, said you told her that you wanted to change your story from your testimony in court yesterday. The prosecutor, Bill Thompson, called us. That was the narrative. So I don't know how preposterous that is to you folks, but it sounds completely preposterous that this DNA expert would leave court that day, go home, write one of her colleagues in her field, not associated with this case, but in her field, allegedly, and say that she just perjured herself in the court that day. Like that storyline is complete nonsense. But this is the time frame we're talking about with the FBI knocking on one of those experts' door. But we're talking about the instances, circumstances surrounding those hearings and what we learned. And that was they seem to maybe have taken a sample that they produced in the Othram lab or perhaps the FBI lab and uploaded that to one of these DNA websites as if that was their DNA profile, right? Like, logging in, like, hey, I want to go find out who my family is. So I'm going to upload this profile, but the profile they were uploading was Kohberger's, and that's not how these law enforcement access to these databases work. It's not how the opting in or opting out of these things work. So yeah, that's right. I couldn't remember her name. Thank you, Vargas. That's right. Yeah, they told her you better knock it off, lady. We'll be back knocking on your door. But nonetheless, so a lot of stuff going around the IGG stuff. Detective Gooch, we now learned, is at the heart of it, right? She's apparently the one calling these brothers after this. And again, this is simply what the lab director for Idaho State Police, the forensic lab director, testified to. We've yet to hear from Detective Gooch herself. But back to the fact that she's the one who's interviewing Dylan Mortensen, that we now know is producing the I was asleep story that we see in the Brett Payne affidavit from the arresting affidavit of Bryan Kohberger, released again on or about January 6th when Kohberger made it back to Idaho in extradition. We now know that those statements came from an interview with now Police Chief of Moscow PD Blaker and FBI Academy. I think he graduated now, so he went to the FBI Academy. It's doesn't mean you're part of the FBI. They offer state and local law enforcement seats in the FBI Academy every year, limited seats. But Blaker's now been there. He's graduated. Gunderson, who was another character, apparently, according to some folks like Howard Blum, was one of the first folks on scene. Gunderson's got some problems with, discovering evidence and hiding evidence in the past. He may be the source of that Brady Giglio motion filed by Bill Thompson back in March of 2023. That's yet to be known. Nonetheless, Blaker, Gunderson, these guys are going to one's graduated, one's attending the FBI Academy now. So, the FBI's got their people in Moscow. There's no doubt about that. Not just Moscow, Russia, Moscow, Idaho. So, when I say that, because they're the ones really, Detective Gooch may be on paper right now doing these, phone calls or in-person investigations with these unknown or unidentified brothers that were deeply involved in her process in which to identify Kohberger. That may all be true, but it was the FBI behind producing this name Kohberger before that. According to lead detective Brett Payne's own testimony, he was told by the FBI the name Bryan Kohberger, but not told anything about a DNA match. And he testified to that back in January 2025 here as well. So the FBI is the ones not only producing this DNA sample later, which would then cause Detective Gooch to do this investigation, they're also the ones who are identifying the vehicle on the one video on Ridge Road. No videos entering or exiting the vehicle. No known location of the vehicle during the crimes, as according to the state's narrative. But it is the FBI that have used that one video to make a very dubious, conflicting at times claim of the make and model and color of that vehicle. Right? I guess they've always agreed on white, but I suppose it's the question of whether or not even the vehicle they're looking at is white. But so it is the FBI behind these things. So I do find it interesting when they do send these officers involved in the case to the FBI Academy. But it is them behind the Gooch, but it is the Gooch making the calls and questioning these people in the IGG investigatory process. And it is her that we now know is questioning Dylan Mortensen in her statements that we see in Brett Payne's arresting affidavit saying she was asleep. So my point being there is Detective Gooch, very important role in this case. We've only recently learned about, right? And on the note, while we're talking the roommates, Detective Gooch here, I'll take a brief detour to remind folks that these are the statements of we're asleep, can't do, they didn't know anything. This was all preceding that actual interview though. So this is November 21st, right? I'm sorry, wait. No, that interview was November 17th. So this is 4 days later. Idaho police don't understand how roommates slept through gruesome murders, right? So these are, they can play these games all they want with it, because I don't think they ever expected these things to go to trial. So when they're playing these games back in November and December with these reports trying to claim that they were asleep, right, and letting Dylan Mortensen say that, and then not questioning her later when proven that she was not asleep is the real key point and telling point in that narrative, right? So the fact that it was really surprising to me to learn that Detective Gooch here was so important, and I'll do a little bit more of a background on her and what she does in life, because she, she's technically on paid salary through the Idaho State Police through the end of 2022. So it seems that immediately following these interviews and immediately following this IGG investigation, she retired. Now, it seems she may have come out of a previous slightly retired state before that. Now she's retired again, but she's once again back actively working for the Idaho State Police in what she describes as a retired fashion. So she's been seemingly dancing this retired line for a number of years. But I'll do a little bit more of a dive there on her here in a bit after I finish this Manson family journey, right? So the statements that is in this article and why I found this article, somewhat intriguing after I discovered the whole Gooch connection. And I'd say not so much the statements here. I mean, there are some comparisons. I mean, bloody, very, knives were used in both of these murder scenes, right? Very bloody, multiple victims, right? Four victims at the Tate Polanski home, and then 4 victims there in Idaho. So, I mean, there are some general similarities, right? With the bloody nature, the weapon used, the home invasion, late night home invasion, right? These are all very striking similarities, and I don't think that's what they really address here in this thing, but that's what jumped out to me, right? I mean, they do address some of the similarities, but I don't think they really highlight those aspects, other than the four victims in both places, right? But anyhow, it was this instance here when Scott Green published a book. Again, I just recently discovered these things, but then I discovered after that article that Scott Green in his book that he published, he takes ownership for removing that article, right? So he publishes this in December of 2023. I think it's entitled "How to Be a Hero While Being a University President," or some other nonsense. I don't remember. It's called I don't remember. Scott Green, University of Idaho president. Coomer, Cumer, Coomer Scott Green. If you want to look for it. But yeah, here on page 360, it says Globe published a headline that 4 students were the victims of a Manson-like cult. Scott recounted. We learned of the story through a few alums and a relative of the Chapin family who saw the cover with the photos, blah, 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 right? That cover with the photos is the picture seen on the cover art for tonight's episode here. But in here on page 360, this is a Google preview, but in here on page 360, he continues to say that he's the one who got that removed from the media. So, Coomer Scott Green, interesting character considering all the FTX fallout and their purchase of that small rural bank just north of town, just north of both campuses, that were doing large-scale money laundering, right? And Scott Green's former law firm being the firm that was involved in the merger between FTX and Binance that collapsed on November 10th. Collapsed on November 9th, 2022 on Wednesday, and caused FTX to file emergency bankruptcy on November 11th, 2022. Thereby, the world learned that they had purchased this small rural bank in the state of Washington, just north of both campuses, Farmington State Bank. They renamed it Moonstone Bank, but nonetheless, it was the result of that bankruptcy that caused that the day prior to the murders. So that's long been the theory that I've asserted, that these Greek organizations of the college campuses of University of Idaho and Washington State University, a long-term, high-volume trend amongst these organizations, that these victims may have inadvertently got wrapped up into and become victimized as a result of it, right? Being the fact that they had just all quit the deceased, the victims, the folks killed in the attack, they had all left their Greek organizations. The surviving roommates had not. And I'll get back into some more of that here this evening, as well as I want to address some more of the surviving roommates activities. Again, Dylan Mortensen lying to the gooch. Law enforcement doesn't care about that, right? So paints an interesting narrative of what is really going on here. So Coomer Scott Green, interesting character though, and he's the one who takes responsibility again for deleting this article from existence. So as this article states, it's again ran on December 26th, 2022. Oop. A little bit too far here. Jumps me to the end. A sick cult of brutal killers hell-bent on recreating the evil Manson family's reign of terror butchered 4 University of Idaho students while they slept and left gruesome notes scrawled in the victim's blood, crime experts tell the Globe. Now, again, they're not going to put a name to it, where they're getting their information. It's a good question. But, I mean, again, they do bring up some, relative to, again, learning the gooch is her father's connected to Colonel Tate, who would go infiltrate the hippie movement in Los Angeles, where Gooch grew up. I'm sorry, in San Francisco Bay Area, where Gooch grew up with her father working for Paul Tate at this very time, right? He would infiltrate the hippie movement in search for his daughter's murderer. So, it is the time frame there as well, with Detective Gooch's father working for Paul Tate. A long-term, multiple assignments, Greece, Chicago, and then the Bay Area together, where he took a civilian position in a top secret job that she never saw him at, according to her own words in that interview. And then again, at the time when he's working for Paul Tate, again, her own words in that interview. So that is the time that military Army intelligence Colonel Paul Tate did infiltrate the hippie movement and search, to investigate his daughter's murder. So very odd. But here it says, law enforcement insiders believe the co-ed murders in Moscow, Idaho, were part of a bloody ritual by a new helter-skelter cult devoted to sowing fear and chaos in America, just like convicted killer Charles Manson's plans to use butchered bodies to spark a race war. Now, there is something to that. Well, the prosecutor who prosecuted the Manson family trials, cases, Vincent Bugliosi would write in his book, Helter Skelter, he would kind of bastardize this narrative of this race war. So this chaos efforts to create chaos in society, and specifically revolving around the areas of race, like kind of Mark Furman's buddies, the white nationalists, of Sandpoint, Idaho. Again, not incriminating any of the victims or their families, just it is odd. 3 of the victims do come from in and around the immediate vicinity of Mark Furman and his pals up there. So, nonetheless, these are the matters of the Process Church. This was their goal: create chaos in society, deal drugs allegedly here in numerous instances across their spectrum of activities. Not the least of which was the Manson family situation, where Jay Sebring, one of the victims, would be known for large-scale drug trafficking out of his hair salon, right? There in Los Angeles. He was the hairstylist to the stars. The infamous Rolling Stones Jim Morrison's hairdo, that was Jay Sebring. He was real good friends with Bruce Lee, him and Sharon Tate both. He was engaged to Sharon Tate prior to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate getting hooked up. They got introduced by Bob Evans, none other than Cocaine Bob himself, right? Again, so he's hooking up Polanski and Tate, and again, one of the other characters in that mess is John Phillips, another character related to the Manson family at the time, at this time period there in Los Angeles, and of the Mamas and the Papas, right? And he would later also, much like Cocaine Bob, they would get busted for drug trafficking together. But it's long been a legend around the John Phillips situation in the Manson families, and Phillips is known, apparently, been identified in law enforcement reports of that era, federal law enforcement reports of that era, that was identified as a financier, I believe is how you say it, a financier of the process church's activities in Los Angeles in the late 60s. And around the time of the Manson murders, Mama Cass, his associate, would also have a similar reputation amongst the same crowd. And it's noted here, amongst many things, here in this article, how they would all, they were all part of the same social circle, right? John Phillips was also friendly with Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate, and claimed in his autobiography that to have narrowly escaped death, having been invited to the house that Polanski and Tate were renting in the Hollywood Hills on that same August 1969 night that the Manson family slaughtered its inhabitants. So he, deeply kind of immersed in that whole crowd, so much that both Phillips and Mama Cass, like I just said, like much of their LA music scene at the time, had peripheral connections to the Manson family, and let's say peripheral connections, right? And were later called to testify for the prosecution at the 1970 trial of Manson and his followers. So, needless to say, he didn't show up. He didn't make it. They both skipped. I believe Mama Cass skipped town and went to the UK, where she'd later allegedly choke on a ham sandwich in the same apartment as Keith Moon, I believe, the drummer for The Who. He would die in that same apartment 2 years later, the apartment of Harry Nilsson, John Lennon's buddy over there in the UK, in the Mayfair district, the same Mayfair district the Process Church originated from, the same John Lennon that's if he wasn't a member, he's surrounded by members of the Process Church, right? But I would argue the Beatles very much Processian, for many reasons. But anyhow, the whole mix, like they were saying, the whole mix of the late 60s LA Hollywood Hills crowd, the Beatles are involved in that crowd. But John Phillips, when we're talking drug trafficking and we're talking these process characters and the Manson family murders, it is of note that 12 years after the murders, John Phillips would get busted for large-scale cocaine trafficking and quote-unquote tens of thousands of pills, right? This was April of 81, like I said, 12 years later, almost 12 years later. Now, strangely enough, John Phillips would serve 2 weeks. I think it was, he got a month sentence. It says here in the article he was looking at least 10 years. No. He got a month sentence, and he got, I think, a week off for good time. So he spent 3 weeks in a medium security prison in Pennsylvania. So he's not the only one. The guy I just said who introduced Tate and Polanski, right? When we're talking to process, this was a major kind of process figure as identified by the author Maury Terry, The Ultimate Evil, surrounding, the activities of the process in Los Angeles, specifically the Cotton Club murders and the murder of Roy Radin. He would also get busted for large-scale cocaine trafficking a year prior to Phillips' 1980. Bob here would also do, well, he at least Phillips did 3 weeks, I suppose. Bob would do 0 days. Bob would do public safety videos, public safety announcements. Kids don't do drugs, He did comment, though, that he would once he took this plea agreement and stuff, he commented that he would forever be known as Cocaine Bob Evans. So I like to keep the man's namesake alive, even though he's passed, is keep calling him Bob Cocaine Evans. But I also like to differentiate between him and the Sausage King of Ohio, the restaurant Bob Evans, so different Bobs. But nonetheless, seems that these drug trafficking situations, much like I alleged, goes in and around the Greek culture of both of these campuses, and again for good reason, in a lengthy historical trend of these activities, which I'll get into after I finish off here with the this Manson family business. But it seems like no one does prison time for this cocaine trafficking amongst this crowd, and it makes you wonder if there's any accountability at all, even for things such as murder, right? So while I do admit some of the Manson family did go to prison, was it the right folks? That's an argument to be made, right? I'm not talking about Charlie himself. I'm talking about some of his quote unquote family, but nonetheless, we have some military kind of intelligence situations surrounding that circumstance too, with one of the folks that still sits in prison today. That's Tex Watson, Charles Tex Watson. He was there, apparently the main figure there at the Tate Polanski home that evening, and killing Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and her apparent boyfriend and drug dealing associate there, Wojciech Frykowski, a friend of Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski couldn't make it for the night of the murders. He was hanging out with the Process Church in Rome. So, you know, that way Roman he acted real butthurt when he got back. But let's be honest about the situation. That seemed like he was probably intentionally not there. But who knows? Who knows? He still ran around with the same crowd: old Jack Nicholson, Bob Cocaine, Evans, and others. So makes you wonder. So this article does go on to say here, after it says law enforcement insiders, you know, they don't want to say any of these law enforcement insiders, but then they go on to say top private detective Paul Hubel tells Globe. Now, I looked up Paul Hubel. He's a retired Chicago PD guy, and you know, like it says, sort of an international private detective dude. But before I get to his statements, this statement here also kind of, you know, at least it seems somewhat relevant in telling this whole storyline here. You know, again, some of this stuff is, you know, if you got unquoted sources, you know, do it for what you will. But when they're trying to explain the similarities between these crimes, you know, and say, and investigators say the Idaho slaughter came on the eve of the 5th anniversary of Manson's November 19th, 2017 prison death, which suggests the bloodbath was a twisted tribute to the neo-Nazi psycho. Which, you know, again, with I think with this process crowd, what it seems to me is dates are important, and whether or not this date was important, I don't know. You know, I would actually argue that the more important date would be the fall of FTX and the revelation of this money laundering bank just north of both campuses. But in the fact that Scott Green's law firm is, you know, has connections to all of that mess, and Scott Green's in league with other, you know, infamous money launderers and kid diddlers. You know, his buddy Leon Black, head of Apollo Global Management, the fellow he's in business with this very controversial acquisition of the University of Phoenix. Well, Leon Black has actually been a prolific money launderer dating back to the Iran-Contra scandal, as well as, you know, all the guns and drugs trafficking and money laundering that was going on, you know, 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, that's Leon. Leon Black was involved in that. And he's paid over $200 million all to folks to avoid charges and lawsuits relative to apparently Jeffrey Epstein victims that he victimized, right? Some folks that Epstein trafficked that Leon Black victimized. So Leon Black, very shady character. But yeah, Scott Green, I would argue that's the date. But, you know, who knows? You know, the that could be the date. Maybe you know, there was some other anniversary. I'm not saying that I believe this is a Manson family murders. I'm saying that isn't it weird between the Gooch connections and then this article that Scott Green himself got removed from the media? I don't know. I'm just saying perhaps grounds for further research, or at least to consideration, especially when you're dealing drug trafficking. And again, while I admit the large volume of reports seem to indicate Mexican drug cartels, such as the Sonora gang cartel leader that just got sentenced in Idaho, I believe 2 weeks ago, or the one of the other cartel leaders that was dealing coke over in Pullman, who just got busted maybe 4 months after the murders, right? So this was a cartel leader that kept coming back to Washington despite being previous convictions and deportations, kept coming back to Washington because that's where the good money was. That's where he could sell the drugs. So, well, those things do go on. Like I pointed out, the process has been the name of the game in cocaine and other drug trafficking for far longer than these cartels. So to me, it almost speaks to, you got to, if you're going to do business in someone else's grounds, you got to at least pay tribute kind of thing, right? So how that works out specifically between these organizations, I don't know. But I do suspect that these process drug trafficking networks did not end in 1969 with the Manson family murders, did not end in 1980 and 81 with John Phillips and cocaine Bob Evans drug trafficking convictions, and it continued on, right? It continued on. So top private detective Paul Hubel tells Globe, these brutal murders have a very familiar ring to them. They are a crazy mirror image of the Southern California murders by the Charles Manson cult some 53 years ago, which were equally as depraved and gruesome. It appears the murderers, and I believe there were several, that much I do agree with. Me and old Paul here, we agree there. There were several, are part of a demonic cult aping the Manson murders. The police and FBI need to be looking at that. Well, I can assure you, Paul, they are certainly not. Manson took the words helter skelter from a Beatles song to mean the beginning of a race war, and former Chicago cop Hubel chillingly warns there could be more deaths to come. These killers are on the loose, and no one should rest easy. That seems like a bit of a fear-mongering situation there, but I do agree the real killers are on the loose. Whether or not no one should rest easy, I don't think we're all in danger. Let's be serious, Paul. Sources point to the similarities between Manson massacres and the Idaho bloodbath, where knives were used in both cases. The family of one of the murdered students, Kaylee Gonzalez, believes her injuries were, quote unquote, significantly more brutal. Again, I think that is an important note that I've gone back to numerous times and journeying back to late 2022 on a trip back to, a blast from the past here in this case and the coverage around it, right? They go on to quote again, Kaylee's family, the means of death don't match. Their points of damage don't match. I'm just going to say it. It wasn't leaked to me. I sent my daughter to college. She came back in a box. So, that was a Steve Gonzalez quote. I'm sure many folks are familiar with that precise clip. In a tragic similarity, pregnant actress Tate, 26, suffered the worst wounds in 1969. She was stabbed 16 times, slashed twice, and hanged one of her breasts was almost cut off. When they say hanged, it's in quotations. They did tie a rope between her and Sebring's neck. They weren't really hanged, though. It was more of a metaphorical hanging, I suppose. The LA County medical examiner said it was overkill. 5 of the stab wounds themselves would have been fatal. So she got stabbed 16 times. She was also hung by a rope as she was dying. The cord was tied around her neck, connecting her to hairdresser friend Jay Sebring, and an X was carved into her belly. Again, she was, I believe, 9 months pregnant or 8.5 at the time of the murders. Manson follower Susan Atkins viciously stabbed Tate to death and scrawled "pig" on the front door with the blood. Now, I do recall rumors preceding the date of this article surrounding this case, claiming that there was blood scrawled on the wall. Whether or not there was any validity to those things, I never found any. That whether or not those were rumors or the point of which said rumors originated from. I do wonder, though, because now that we can confirm that the Greek system was Snapchat messaging each other as early as 10 a.m. is now admitted by the state. But I would say, looking at those transcripts, it could be as early as 4 a.m., considering those are the first Snapchats, I believe. Again, not sleeping, and the police were never befuddled as to why the roommates were sleeping, as that article published 4 days after the Gooch interview with Dylan Mortensen claiming she was sleeping. Idaho police don't understand how roommates slept through gruesome murders. These were statements police made to media. So, again, all nonsense. But the whether or not there's anything scrawled on the walls, I suspect that at least was probably at least a rumor that was circulating through those Snapchat messages that morning, long before 911 was called. Again, the validity of which couldn't tell you. Like the Manson family murders, the Idaho crime scene was described as a blood-soaked mess. From a blood evidence standpoint, this is a profoundly bloody scene, says Joseph Scott Morgan, distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. Another crime scene expert close to the case believes the 2 massacres had a similar motive. So, again, it's when you start getting to these, that's a generalized statement from a forensics expert. It's when you start getting to these quotes around the case that says, unnamed sources, right? But again, so does the mainstream media. So, and I'm not saying they should be believed over this article or anything else. What I'm just saying is, in a gagged case, how, you really can't name things, but we've seen things from the case released to the media that we now know is seemingly leaks from within, right? Things that have been reported in the past from mainstream media and some podcasters, apparently, that seem to indicate strongly that there is information leaked, not the least of which was this recent 911 call that has the actual phone call that has this whole mysterious release situation involving, again, characters in media and podcasting medias and, unofficial release of it, right, in a gagged case. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's certainly possible somebody close to this case made some statements to some folks here and couldn't be quoted. But I'm not saying that adds validity to it. I'm just saying it's certainly plausible. I believe this was done as a chilling message to the college kids, children of privilege, that no one is safe, just like the Manson killings was a message to the Hollywood elite, says the expert who asked to remain confidential. Well, I would say yes and no. So I agree with that statement in part. So I do think that, I do think it is a message. I don't think it's necessarily a message to the children of privilege, nor did I think the Manson killings were specifically a message to the Hollywood elite. However, this is the media narrative in which these things were shaped from, right? So immediately following the Manson killings the media all said, I think it was first Black Panthers, but then when they landed on Manson and his family a few months later as being the culprits of the matter, they said it was the dirty hippies were attacking the Hollywood A-listers, right? So then no one addressed these people all knew each other. They always say, oh, we don't know each other. But these people, Manson family stuff, they all knew each other. And Manson had been at that home, et cetera, et cetera. So, but to that point, it is how it was sold in the media. And, in a very in creating a lot of chaos, and again, creating chaos in the process, right? Which I think is somewhat of the goal. I didn't mean to use the word process there as a pun, but it is sort of, again, the process MO, creating chaos. So this idea that 4 young college students could be murdered in their home in the middle of the night in a stealthy manner, unseen and basically unheard, right? Well, and leaving essentially zero evidence of the crime. Well, this in a sleepy college town in Moscow, Idaho, well, this does fit the mold, in my opinion, is creating the perfect chaos narrative in the media. Because, not only were folks, and for good reason, folks were apprehensive of sending their children back to college there in January and December 2022 for the end of the year, January 2023 for the start of the new semester. Again, for good reason, including Detective Gooch. So she discusses in that same interview we heard the clip of, talking about her father and Paul Tate, how she sent her daughter back to school despite breaking the law and despite against university policy, carrying a gun. So, and again, I'm not saying you shouldn't carry guns. Everyone's constitutional right. It's America. But, what I'm saying is even Detective Gooch was apprehensive about sending her daughter back to school and was only willing to do so with sending her daughter with a gun. Again, don't take my word for it. Listen to the Gooch. I got a link for that interview in the show notes. So I do think there was a certain degree of that. I do find it odd that seemingly the victims' families had no problem sending their other children back to school, right? Be it the other 2 Chapin triplets, be it Xander Kernodle's older sister over there in the sorority at Washington State, be it Kaylee Gonzalez's older brother, who was a fraternity member at University of Idaho, right? It seems that, Madison Mogan seems the only one I believe that didn't have a sibling going back to college there on the campus, and also not involved in the Greek system, right? Because all these ones are involved in the Greek system with the siblings as well. But I do find it odd that those folks were seemingly okay with sending their children back to school, which, let alone any other parent on that campus. And again, it wasn't a small amount of the campus. I believe it was 40% of the students did not return back after Thanksgiving break in 2022. So when school's starting back up on January 11th, you better believe it that Coomer Scott Green's going to have someone in custody to get all them students back on campus, get the butts in them seats. Because based upon his own financial analysis back in 2020 during the shutdown, they were going to lose at least $3 million a quarter for not even having the students on campus butts and seats. This would have been the distance learning. That would have been the loss, just not having them on campus, let alone the town's loss. So financially speaking, they would have been devastated. They were already devastated at that time. I know they're doing better now financially, despite their ludicrous University of Phoenix acquisition with the ardent kid diddler Leon Black. Besides all that, they were doing better financially as the university and enrollment. But when Scott Green took over, they were in the red in 2019. So, he immediately started cutting folks to reduce, the losses, and then got hit with the 2020 COVID shutdown. And, shit was not looking good for Scott Green there for a couple of years. They were not doing well financially. Again, had these kids not come back to school, as young adults not come back to school there in January, on January 11th, when they got Kohberger back on January 6th in custody. So rest assured, parents of local college students, you can come on back. But nonetheless, that big factor. So I think we're done with that article. But while we're on the factor of these students, the victims, their siblings, and these Greek organizations, let's take another trip back down in the blast from the past here in this matter, and let me readdress a previous analysis I had in regards to one of the surviving roommates. That would be Bethany Funk, the one excluded from all police statements. They don't care about her testimony, but Kohberger's counsel says, wait a second, she's got exculpatory evidence, and we've yet to ever hear that. So I said, when I was previously doing an analysis of where are they now, Bethany Funk versus Dylan Mortensen, where Dylan Mortensen's still in Idaho, possibly still a college student, definitely, by all appearances, still a member of the same sorority at the same chapter at the same university, whereas Bethany here went to Reno, and I thought, well, I had the incorrect assessment here. I thought this was a Jewish unaffiliated organization, fraternity, right? ATO. This is not. This is Alpha Tau Omega, the Greek ATO. They're also, though, regarding at least University of Reno, Nevada here, they're also, though, an unaffiliated, unofficial Greek organization, but that's for different reasons. So here in this photo back in December of last year, we see Bethany Funk as a quote-unquote sweetheart, presumably romantically involved with some fellow over there in that fraternity. How this fraternity exists on the University of Reno, I'm unclear about. So she also does not appear to have left the Greek life herself there at the University of Reno. This just is a fraternity she clearly associates with. Whether or not she's a Phi Beta Pi there remains to be seen, but I have seen evidence to support she's still in the Greek life on above that photo. But here you'll see on the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, unrecognized fraternities and sororities. And you just scroll down here and see the following organizations are currently unrecognized by the university: Alpha Tau Omega. And it says the reason for that is outstanding conduct matters. So then I go here and I click on their conduct reports. And their last conduct report violation was in 2016, and they were suspended for 2 years. So how that affects today is beyond me. But still today, as you can see here on that website, they do not have official status, right, on the University of Reno, Nevada. So what I'm saying is, not only does not appear Bethany Funk, I was wrong in my previous conclusions, she had departed the sorority life there in Nevada. Nope, doesn't seem that way. And also the fraternity she's apparently the quote-unquote sweetheart of, they're into hood rat shit, apparently. So much hood rat shit, they're on double secret probation, Animal House style, because that ain't listed on this website. So they are listed as banned, right? How you exist as a fraternity in your band is beyond me, but they do try to explain that right here, right? It says that, let's see here. Wait, nope, wrong one. Let's go back to this one. They do explain this whole unofficial, unregistered or whatever they call it. The Office of Student Conduct has jurisdiction when allegations of misconduct by a club or organization are reported and will investigate the allegations. The investigations of misconduct by a club or organization may result in findings. That's their whole Greek council system. Somewhere here it had described what this definition was. It was basically like you can go join it. I'll just break it down for you. You can go join these other organizations, they tell you, but they are not funded by the school. They have no affiliation with the school. It's basically old school. You know, that movie where them old dudes, Will Ferrell and Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn, they play them old dudes who just start their own fraternity on a campus, but unaffiliated with the university. I mean, that's the kind of environment I'm painting here with this organization, because they're apparently near campus. And apparently it's comprised of apparently college students, but I'll get to that notion in a minute. At least in a different fraternity's sake or instance, they're at Washington State University. But it's odd to me you have like this university whose their suspension is not even listed on the university's website, right? But they are listed as suspended, right? Like, you know, seemingly in a more of a permanent fashion, it almost sounds like, but who knows? Despite their having the conduct reports on there, no conduct report for this group. So it seems like they're into some hood rat shit. So I did want to correct that aspect of the situation. and relative to where are they now, the surviving roommates, especially when we see all this tomfoolery surrounding the lies that Dylan Mortensen gave to the Gooch back in November 17, 2022, and the fact that the Gooch and gang and Brett Payne in his affidavit didn't want to include the statements of Bethany Funk. That's not important. And in this investigation, and these were all decisions they made back then. That back then they didn't expect this to go to trial, right? So these their shenanigans that are going on now are like, oh, we got to answer for these things. You want me to produce evidence? You wanted me to question the other roommate? Oh, we didn't do that. You know what I mean? So that's kind of that storyline there. But as I scroll down through here, I've all on the side when this, where are they now? I've continued on an early theory that I've long felt in this case, that there's something wrong about Dylan Mortensen, right? We're learning more and more about that now with the I was asleep lies to the Gooch, the fact that Gooch and no one else cares about her lying to them, right? In that report. As we all now know, that not only they were awake doing all these, the transcript that's been made public now, which there's probably more that's still not made public relative to their phone activity that morning, because we have evidence right here from Dylan Mortensen's VSCO account. That's this image here on the left. She wiped it clean on her about December 8th, 2022. Here's a picture on the right from that Friday night party that she was inviting Kaylee Gonzalez to, right, to be a +1. Despite Madison Moog and Xander Kernodle both quitting their sororities confirmed back at the start of the school year, Kaylee Gonzalez apparently having a fractured relationship with her sorority, not living with them, not going to parties with them. Dylan Mortensen, I question whether or not she can have a +1 at all. Again, my early theory here is something going on here, and as we see the lies and stuff, it makes me, question even further that she's LARPing, right? She's doing she's faking being a college student, faking being a sorority member in order to get that status as the appearance of a sorority member in dealing drugs, right? So she's part of the drug trafficking network. When I first asserted that possibility, right? I'm not saying that's fact. It's certainly what evidence seems to exhibit to me. When I first started saying that, though, a couple years ago here, didn't really have any other evidence of precedent being set for doing exactly that. However, I've since now located, back in 2009, a fraternity at Washington State University who had a student LARPing as a member of the fraternity, LARPing as a college student, and he was the ringleader in a cocaine trafficking network out of that fraternity, causing that fraternity to be suspended for 5 years. So I'll get to that in a second. We do know that Dylan Mortensen was lying. His VSCO account still not included on the transcript on November, the date and timestamp of these photographs. There's not the date and timestamp the photograph was taken. It's the date and timestamp. The photograph was uploaded to this app with the time zone in which the photograph was uploaded from, right? So according to the own rules of this website, this VSCO video photo editor application thing, November 13th at 3:33 in the morning. So now we know that Dylan Mortensen was not asleep. She was awake now, according to these new transcripts. But it does not includes her adding a contact, I believe, to her phone at 3:51. According to this evidence that she would scrub clean on December 8th, she was awake posting this photo at 3:33 in the morning. So that being said, if she is LARPing, that being said, she's got a real questionable state with honesty and ethics. I'll give you that much, right? So on that note, if she is LARPing, right? If she never was a sorority member, which again, a lot of that I think can be said with the situation, even if she is a sorority member, right? It still makes you wonder what is going on in these photographs. So the media published these back in September, I believe it was October of 2023 or November maybe, of a Halloween party video where she's singing and dancing. And then these photographs, and I tracked down this photograph on the left from the media article to the Instagram account that it credited in the article right here on the photo. It says Instagram, and it said Jesse Patnode. So I found that out, tracked it down. So this young lady here next to Dylan on the left, in the left-hand photo here, that's supposed to be her little sister. And you can see Dylan wearing a G Big Sister shirt, meaning that her little sister here with her is now a big sister to a different sorority girl, right? And again, the years to me are questionable that these circumstances go on with Dylan as a junior. I admit it is possible. However, that's not what these pictures tell me. So this is September 2023 is the date of these photographs from the Instagram account of Jessup Patnode. And Dylan's at the Phi Beta Pi house at University of Idaho in Moscow a year after the murders. Bethany refuses to come to testify when subpoenaed, and she's living in another state. But Dylan's like, I'm going to still party with these folks, I guess, right? And apparently still be part of the system. So if the story the media sold is she transferred to schools, they don't say where. And if that's true, well, then if you transfer schools, let's say you stay in the Phi Beta Pi program, right? If she was there in the first place, would she not then be part of the new chapter? Why would she be a G big sister at the Moscow University of Idaho chapter of Phi Beta Pi a year after the murders? So these are the questions I have surrounding that. Again, that's September 18th, 2023. On September 22nd, 24th, 2023, there was a centennial reunion of the Phi Beta Pi chapter there at University of Idaho, 100 years party. So is that why she was up there on the 18th? Was it a multi-day trip for her? Inconclusive. Because here in these photographs, right here on, I believe, dated September 20th, right? This is that little sister of her little sister, Jessup Patnode. She's taking these photographs in a sorority, house membership. Their whole Phi Beta Pi crew, little photo op here in front of the water tower there, not far from the murder house there on the campus, right? Right there by Greek Row. However, when you go to the Phi Beta Pi Instagram account and try to click on that group photo with the water tower right there in the center, it won't come up. I've been told some folks have found it, and I would appreciate if someone would email it to me, despite them telling me what was already in there, and that is no Dylan Mortensen. So that I'm not surprised with. So she's in doing photographs, right, with the sisters, little sister and her little sister, right? At the same time, they're taking these photographs, but she's not in the group photographs, and that's a going trend for Dylan Mortensen. She's not in group photographs of the sorority. This is her little sister. Her little sister's in the back row of this sorority group photograph from their thing. I can find Xander Kernodle and Madison Mogan and Bethany Funk all in group photographs and inside the sorority home in various functions. Not Dylan Mortensen. So these are the things I'm saying. Dylan Mortensen's photograph here in the center, that's her little sister when she became a member of the sorority. And that's them on the right again here in the murder house. You see the good time sign. That's from that VSCO account there on the right. Photograph on the left, her and Bethany Funk deleted from the sorority's Instagram page. Not sure why. Not sure if it means anything, but that was August 11th, 2022. No longer there. So you can see the other, she's in this group photo, but again, it's not inside the house. She does take photographs in front of the house, as seen here on the right-hand side, right? The photograph in the middle, which seems to indicate this is her as a freshman during Earth Day as part of the sorority. As this one on the left, this would have been around rush time, her freshman year, 2021, at the sorority. However, this is not the sorority, though. Once again, here on the left during rush time, she's not in the rush photographs for sorority that year. Bethany Funk is. Dylan appears with and around that rush time with photographs on the Phi Beta Pi Instagram page. However, that photograph right there is taken on that railing. Is taken right here. So there's the murder house right here, and then there's Taylor Avenue where that Bandfield police department minors intoxicated incident occurred in around the time of the murders. That is the corner of this parking lot in this apartment building, and they're standing right here on this corner of this was that third floor? So you can see it here on the right hand side, the third floor balcony. That's the photograph she's pictured in. So again, I would feel more comfortable to make claims either way if I could find more evidence, but the evidence I do find it paints a picture that seems to indicate that she's could be LARPing, live action role playing, as a sorority member. And again, I kind of came to that conclusion based upon analyzing, her circumstances and situations. However, again, it's not without precedent, right? So as I look here on this article from, was this April 2009? April 13th, 2008. Details emerge in probe of frat. So when Washington State University announced in February that it was yanking its recognition of Alpha Kappa Lambda fraternity over allegations of drug dealing and other rule violations, it said little about the case. But a review of hundreds of pages of university and court records show that allegations of drug dealing A witness intimidation against several former members of the frat grew out of a year-long investigation by Palouse drug detectives. The main target of the probe was Christopher Smith, who was described in police reports and court records as a well-known source of cocaine among some students in the Greek system at WSU. In a written report, one officer described Smith, known as Smitty, as a quote-unquote honorary AKL member, honorary Alpha Kappa Lambda fraternity member, although he's not a WSU student, right? He would plead guilty to these drug trafficking charges. The frat would be suspended by the university and its national chapter. So its national chapter actually revoked its charter for 5 years. So that's precisely, that circumstance right there is precisely what I'm inferring may in fact be the circumstances surrounding Dylan Mortensen. Is she a college student? Inconclusive. Allegedly she transferred, yet she's back doing sorority duties at the sorority house at Phi Beta Pi and University of Idaho over a year, almost a year later. So that's odd. And again, Smitty there, he was well known amongst the Greek system of WSU and known as a quote unquote honorary member. I presume he was sold as a member. The police folks were probably calling him an honorary member to try to church it up a bit, but well, very likely you're not going to introduce like, yeah, this is my honorary frat brother right here. They're going to be like, hey, this is my frat brother Smitty, because there was a number of characters. They were actual frat members and actual college students that were identified and were held accountable for, not just Smitty. So, but is Dylan Mortensen the new Smitty? I think it's certainly possible. Certainly grounds for further research, if you ask me, with some of her activities and lies. And again, why does the law enforcement, why do they not care, right? Why do they not care about these lies? Why do they not care that Dylan Mortensen seemingly makes conflicting statements to them, right? Doesn't seem to be an important factor for them. Even though we now know she wasn't sleeping, it's now demonstrated publicly through releases and unsealing of these documents that have been known internally to the case for a very long time, specifically to the law enforcement authorities charging Bryan Kohberger. Why do they not care that this surviving roommate has a very mysterious tale, has made very, very conflicting statements, right? And again, I think these factors is what speaks to the overarching parapolitical impact on this case, be it from Scott Green and his pals at FTX for the money laundering, be it the drug trafficking, be it the LARPing, right? If she's LARPing, right? And again, when I say all this drug trafficking, they clearly, incidents dating back further than 2008, but routinely between both campuses every 2 years amongst these organizations, large scale drug trafficking, cocaine, pill stamping, I don't think it was heroin, maybe Molly. There's a number of these incidents, right? So the pill stamping was the Xanax, right? So, if all that stuff did get wrapped up in Scott Green's buddies up there at FTX, Moonstone Bank, and Farmington State Bank, Washington, Farmington, Washington, the bank formerly known as Farmington State Bank, then changed to Moonstone after they paid off the chief regulators for the state of Washington, the banking regulator. Then they hired him as their chief legal officer. And you'll see here in this article, chief legal officer departs FTX-linked Moonstone Bank. And that was January 6, 2023. That's because on or about, we're seeing some important dates here in this case. That was when Kohberger was brought back. On or about December 20th, 19th, when Brett Payne testified he got Kohberger's name from the FBI. Well, that same Department of Justice is getting ready to raid Moonstone Bank on or about, I believe, December 22nd. So you have to wonder what is really going on in this case. And that became again, once FTX filed that bankruptcy on November 11th, and these victims were killed less than 48 hours later, I would say more like 30, probably more like 40 or 36 or 40 hours later by the sound of things. Everyone found out about this Moonstone situation. It became such a wildfire across regulators on Wall Street and federal government, FDIC, SEC, because they were mixing crypto, right? So Bankman-Fried, his pals, again, the regulation, they paid off the state regulators, right? They apparently paid off the federal regulators, not to change the regulations, but just to look the other way. So as soon as all this stuff popped off, it says, the Fed responds to the Moonstone Bank mystery saying, look, we have no idea. So literally the FDIC is like, look, we're out to lunch. We apologize. We didn't know what they were doing. But I would say that indicates someone paid them to look the other way. But nonetheless, this was a very big deal amongst the Wall Street crowd and regulators as far as how in the hell did this bank and crypto mix together in one organization, violating all banking rules. So this was a very big thing, and caught a lot of eyes. And I'm just saying, perhaps that helps motivate some of the murders around here. Of the drug trafficking money was somehow linked in with the money laundering operation just north of town with some of Scott Green's old pals. Perhaps there was more impetus there, and perhaps the knowledge that this would get immediate attention across all of the banking and regulatory and enforcement industry. Well, maybe they're like, we really got to take care of this. May have stoked even more motivation in the situation. Is what I'm saying. So, because again, to most folks who don't pay attention to financial markets or even pay attention to the news, and I'm in large part both of those categories, but I was already tracking these crypto situations and the dubious nature surrounding them preceding these events. So when they filed bankruptcy, because again, that was a big deal, right? They literally evaporated billions and billions of dollars. And on top of that, they were involved in the money laundering of billions and billions of dollars, including money laundering linked to the Ukraine. So, and all the money that, so a lot of, I'm not going to say all of it, there's varying reports of how much, but a lot of money that was sent over to Ukraine, even taxpayer money, was apparently funneled back through to other parties through FTX by according to some reports. So, there's other connections there, but that may be the worst example of it, right? If we're sending U.S. taxpayer money to Ukraine to fund this war, and folks over in Ukraine, be it Zelensky or whomever it is within the machinations of whatever the fuck's going on over there, they're just taking skimming some off the top and funneling it through Bankman-Fried for money laundering, it seems. So more to come there, I'm sure, but Bankman-Fried's still on trial, and a lot of this shit is still being kept under wraps, to be quite honest with you, relative to that situation with FTX. But given the nature of which things would erupt around the situation with that bank, the bankruptcy, and the fact that literally anyone who has any interest in crypto, banking, regulatory or enforcement, etc., they all had their eyes on what the fuck. How did FTX buy a bank in Washington, and what were they doing? We still don't know what they were doing completely. I mean, a lot of that's been swept under the rug, despite being raided and money being seized by the Department of Justice in December 2022, January 2023. There were some fines paid, but no one really went to prison. That chief legal counsel, he's like, look, guys, I quit. I learned my lesson. I won't do it again. I won't change the laws for people to pay me off to change laws, and I won't go work for their criminal enterprise. I just won't do it. I have ethics and morals, I assure you, and I won't do it again. That's basically that guy's situation. So again, no one's really being held accountable, and much of this story is being swept away still. So there's definitely a lot more to that tale. How much money was being funneled through there locally? Well, locally, it seems hundreds of millions of dollars. If that money was being proceeds from drug trafficking operations, I suspect, it's coming from somewhere in the area, right? You're not trucking cash in there, right? That operation is there for a reason. You might be trucking cash in regionally, but like hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't think so. Not from, I'm not saying it's a downtrodden region. I'm just saying they got some folks that have money out there. I'm just saying, that's not happening. There's obviously drug trafficking money going there from somewhere. And again, it's not without precedent. Once again, things without precedent in the situation. Dylan Mortensen possibly LARPing, not without precedent. Leon Black, there, the associations with Scott Green and the acquisition of University of Phoenix are money launder, dating back to Iran-Contra with the drug and gun running money laundering scandals of spooky operations. Spooky operations, kind of like Paul Tate and Vicky Gooch's dad, right? Spooky operations. Kind of like Jean Chalopin, Sam Bankman-Fried's buddy, in the purchase of that Moonstone Bank. Another fella with dating back to the BCCI, Iran-Contra scandals of the 80s and 90s. Financially speaking, money laundering. He's also the inventor of Inspector Gadget, so do that for what you will. So as I bring all this to a close here, as I'm wrapping up a few of those thoughts, I also want to address some other, go back in the Wayback Machine here, so to speak, in my brain hole. Go back to December 7th, right? When Chief Fry, when we're talking about these roommates, right? We're talking about the siblings of the victims, and relative to these Greek organizations, right? We're talking about Alpha Kappa Lambda, the one that had a fraternity member LARPing, old Smitty there. Good old Smitty, LARPing as a fraternity member, LARPing as a college student, dealing lots of coke. Well known across the Greek system of WSU, according to that report. Was Dylan Mortensen well known across the University of Idaho Greek system? By all appearances, she seems to be. Yeah, she seems to be. Moscow PD's got to be a big fan of her. Same with Idaho State Police. Whether or not she made those statements to begin with that she slept, she's at least playing the game, right? They're not charging her. She ain't changing her story, right? So back on December 7th, old Chief Fry here, this is when he's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to, with a shit-eating grin on his face, I'm going to drive over here to the murder house. I had the press release here. Give me 1 second. I had a press release here for this event. There we go. December 6th, press release. The day prior. So December 7th is when they released the white Elantra mystery, right? We need the world's help in identifying the occupant and occupants of the 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. No attention. We're going to change all these details later. So same day he drives the U-Haul over there. Probably around the same time they released the press release. It was that morning. But this is the press release saying that they were going there the next day, right? So I'm saying the press release for the car went out around the same time they're going to the house. This is the press release from December 6th, 2022, where they're saying, look, we're going to go clean out the house tomorrow, right? So they're saying this before they're even, they know they're asking for the public's help for a suspect or suspects, help identify this car. We're clueless, but they're releasing while having that in their minds already and making those statements to the public, and fuck the townspeople who have got to be frightened at this point. Folks in the local area, that is. Parents of students who don't live in the local area or who are afraid of sending their children back there. Hell, my son's of college age. I wouldn't want him going into that environment. Nonetheless, they're telling folks, we're going to go over to the residence tomorrow and we're going to go ahead and empty it out. We're going to do it for the families. We're going to help get all the victims' belongings out, get them back to the families. Are you fucking kidding me? This is an active crime scene. You don't have any suspects. In fact, you're announcing to the world, we got our thumbs up our asses. We need your help. Granted, I don't believe their statements. I don't think they're being honest or objective, but I'm just saying, if you were to take their statements at face value, they're telling the world we got our thumbs up our asses, but we're going to go clean out this crime scene anyway. And that's when James Fry pulls up on December 7th with the U-Haul. Says, look, guys, we're cleaning this motherfucker out. And they start cleaning it out, right? Mind you, none of them have their booties on their shoes and stuff. They went from the no booties, the no gloves, to booties and gloves, to now we're back in the phase by December 7th of, well, we'll put on some gloves, like not necessarily like, forensic investigatory gloves or anything like that, the plastic gloves or anything. We'll have some gloves on, but no booties. No, we're not doing that. We got to empty this place. That's the priority, right? So they're moving stuff out, right? And they got the whole team there, right? You got Chief Fry, you got Roger Lanier in these pictures. You got an Idaho State Police guy here. I'm not sure which one that is, but they're moving. They may want to look at some part-time jobs, doing some moving some stuff for folks, because they're doing a good job. It's pretty effective. They filled up this U-Haul pretty quick. They're packing that full. They got a couple trucks packed full. Here you got Roger Lanier here on the side of the truck with the Idaho State Police guy. It's jam-packed. First of all, where's any blood on any of this stuff? How do you clean a crime scene in the middle of investigation? Nonetheless, in the middle of investigation, you don't have a suspect. You just announced to the world, I got my thumbs up my ass and we don't have any suspect. We need your help. And then they've cleaned up the mess a little bit. They're stacking it properly now. So, you can see the truck's full. And then I stumble across this photograph from December 7th. They're carrying out a piece of luggage from that home, 1122 King on December 7th. It says Steve Gonzalez, GEG airport code, right? So GEG airport code, that's Spokane, Washington. So that makes sense. Kaylee and her brother, Steve, number 3, right? They're Kaylee's dad, Steve Jr., her brother, Steve, number 3. He was a fifth-year senior in the year 2022, 2023 at University of Idaho. He graduated computer science. My question surrounding, and I got some other details about the guy here in a second. My questions around this is, so Kaylee Gonzalez moved out of the home, right? She's just back there visiting to be Dylan Mortensen's +1. So why she's not Madison Mogen's +1? Why she's not Xana Kernodle's +1? Beyond me, right? But that's the story, right? Whether or not Xana and Maddie are going to this Phi Beta Pi party that Kaylee's the +1 to, when Xana and Maddie, or Madison Mogen and Xana Kernodle, while they quit their sororities, how would they be accepted back at this party that Friday night, November 11th, right? How would Ethan Chapin, who allegedly was suspended from his frat, How would he be allowed at Sigma Chi party on November 12th? Right? These are the questions I have, but nonetheless, Steve Gonzalez, number 3, had his luggage in the murder home on December 7th being removed, at least a piece of luggage with his baggage claim tag on it, right? He may have flown back to the university with his sister and checked her bags for her, who knows? But if she moved out, why would she not take that with her? And if she moved out prior to these events, why is Steve Gonzalez, her brother, have luggage over there, right? Is he using it for storage over there? That's certainly possible. But even if that's the case, what that indicates and what this picture indicates and what if he's using it for storage over there indicates is he's got more connections to that home than has ever been reported publicly, right? So he was a member. Not only is his luggage being, or at least a piece of luggage with a baggage claim tag with his name on it, being taken out of the murder home long after his sister allegedly moved out. He was a member of the Alpha Kappa Lambda fraternity on the University of Idaho, the same fraternity there on Washington State University in Pullman that was dealing coke out of there with their LARPing frat member Smitty, right? So Alpha Kappa Lambda just happened to also be he was a senior there, like I said, 5th year senior, a year older than his sister, started in 2018 there, graduated in 2023. Kaylee was graduating at that time as well, but he was a year ahead. He got started school a year ahead of her, so he was a 5th year senior, member of Alpha Kappa Lambda. And again, that's the same fraternity. Who also is a member of Alpha Kappa Lambda, Caden Young, the young man who got a hot shot laced dose of fentanyl laced cocaine, drug overdose death there in March of 2023, 2 days after the Kohberger's counsel had demanded to speak with Bethany Kohberger for exculpatory evidence. The chronology of these events, folks, should not be ignored. On March 22nd, Kohberger's attorneys demand, based upon statements from his private investigator who had conducted an investigation exhibiting the fact in that investigation that Bethany Funk did indeed hold exculpatory evidence that would free Bryan Kohberger. And that was March 22nd, 2023. Caden Young dies of a hotshot overdose death in Seattle on March 24th, 2023, with Moscow Pullman drug dealers. They gave him the drugs up there in Seattle. So why he's 4 hours, almost 5 hours away travel time by car with Moscow area drug dealers, I think seems to indicate a drug trafficking pipeline that exists from in and around that area down to Pullman and Moscow. However, it's also important to note that Caden Young had just resigned as the president of his fraternity there at Alpha Kappa Lambda there in the University of Idaho. And if they're anything like their brother fraternity over there at Washington State, well, I suspect they got a real drug problem. Smitty and gang over there didn't do him any favors in building a good name for the Alpha Kappa Lambdas. Also there, though, besides Caden Young, like I said, Kaylee Gonzalez's brother. So, Steve Gonzalez, number 3, most certainly would have known Caden Young because Caden Young, according to things such as his obituary and other evidence to indicate these things, he was a longtime leader of that Alpha Kappa Lambda chapter of the University of Idaho, where it says he was the actual from secretary to president. It says Cade repeatedly made the dean's list and held every high-ranking position in the beloved fraternity Alpha Kappa Lambda from secretary to president. That is correct. Upon further review, he did in fact serve as secretary, vice president, and president. I didn't find any record of treasurer, but nonetheless, when he resigns in 2022-2023 school year, which I've yet to conclude, even based on photographs, precisely when that was, because they scrubbed their photographs, right? You're not going to find Steve Gonzalez or Caden Young in these photographs on the Alpha Kappa Lambda stuff, at least not now. Maybe you could in the past before he got scrubbed, but they're nowhere to be seen. But Steve Gonzalez, not on his LinkedIn either, but yeah, he was an Alpha Kappa Lambda. He allegedly was not in Moscow at the time of the murders, doing some online coursing, which I'm fine with. It's okay. But nonetheless, that luggage seems to indicate he had a closer relationship with that murder home than simply his sister living there. Be it possibly just storing some stuff there long after his sister moved. Who knows? Maybe they just left it behind. That's always a potential, right? They're like, oh, we don't need that luggage anymore. But nonetheless, Kaylee's back there, right? So, it's those kind of details don't seem to indicate the situation. What seems to indicate what's going on here is Steve Gonzalez, number 3, has got some, maybe hung out there a lot with his sister and friends. Who knows? Nonetheless, his name's never really been mentioned in regards to that, to even lesser extent than the Chapin triplets, whose vehicles were parked there, right? Ethan Chapin's siblings' vehicles were parked there, right? Their names have never really been brought into any narratives or timelines or discussions so much really either, outside of this alleged party, right, that folks were attending the night before. But as far as the immediate 24 hours or 12 hours preceding the murders, where their cars were sitting at the murder home, I haven't seen anything addressed with what timeline of events that occurred there. Again, I question all of the timeline of events of all of the victims and the surviving roommates on November 12th. So, and the early morning hours of the 13th. But nonetheless, you know, Alpha Kappa Lambda, Washington State, they like to LARP. They got LARPing drug dealers over there, right? Alpha Kappa Lambda at University of Idaho. I mean, Steve Gonzalez might know some more stuff that goes on there. I'm sure Caden Young did. You know, I don't think it's by any, to understand the victimology of the death of Caden Young, I think you have to understand the victimology of the death of the other four victims, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. That victimology is all of these young folks had resigned from these Greek organizations that, by all appearances, seem to have some drug trafficking problems, you know, on and above Caden Young being dying from a hot shot overdose death of fentanyl-laced cocaine in Seattle with 2 Moscow drug dealers. These aren't the only examples of pipelines, drug pipelines between Seattle and the towns of Moscow and Pullman, revolving, you know, focusing around the activities of the Greek societies there, the Greek organizations, that is. Not to be confused with Greek people like Vicky Gooch, who's a Greek person, but not a member of the Greek societies, despite although she is a grad of University of Idaho. And I think it is also important to note this key person, detective in this case, was like, despite getting these alleged statements from the victim that she's sleeping and everything else like that, or these, I'm sure having knowledge of these phone records later showing that she wasn't sleeping if she's being this involved in the case, she doesn't feel comfortable sending her daughter back to the University of Idaho without a gun. So take that for what it will either. So I don't know. Wild tales, folks. Manson family style murders in the Idaho 4 case. I never really expected to be having this conversation. Well, again, I do see correlations with these matters of the drug trafficking, the brutal natures of these crimes. You know, the things that stick out most to me is perhaps relative to these matters is just the fact that an underling of Colonel Paul Tate, Colonel Military Intelligence, his underling is, you know, who seemingly worked in and around with Paul Tate leading up to and around the time there in the Bay Area where Tate's going undercover to infiltrate the hippie movement, investigating his murder, you know, the murder of his daughter. You know, Vicky Gooch's dad works there. It's an interesting aspect of whether it yields no further information or has no other connections to this case. It's an interesting aspect nonetheless. And again, I'm not saying that has any connection to that Globe article. I just find it interesting after learning those details by Vicky Gooch's own statements, right? You know, hear it from her. Don't take it from me. Links in the show notes with that interview of hers. You know, and then finding that article and then finding that Scott Green brags about removing that article. I mean, well, that's fucking interesting, man. Because when you're talking Iran-Contra, you know, things like Scott Green's buddy Leon Black there, things like their fellow up there, John Chalopin. When you're talking BCCI, money, guns, and drug laundering business, BCCI, Iran-Contra, spook style stuff, right? All spooky stuff, right? Well, when you're talking those things and you see all the same kind of elements dance around this situation again, you know, why did Brett Payne become the lead detective? Is it because he holds a top secret clearance for the Army as an officer? Is it because his brother is an officer for the Rangers, also with a top secret clearance? I don't know. You know, because again, Brett Payne becoming this rookie lead detective in this matter, and then creating this fucking boondoggle he has where he can't substantiate claims he made in his affidavit based upon videos he claimed to have seen in writing that affidavit. Videos the FBI is holding, you know, under the away from Kohberger and team due to some sort of interpretation of the law that just seems to make them think they can do that. We're going to try you for something. We're not going to give you the evidence. We're going to play these games that, well, the FBI's got it, in which that may be true because the FBI ran their own grand jury before the state did on this matter. And that's a whole different level of constitutional rights violations. If you ask me, these games are playing with these grand juries at the different levels and the access to the evidence. It is this ongoing effort though that screams the parapolitical connections here, right? And again, if you're talking military spook activity, you know, why is Brett Payne the detective, right? And why did he serve in literally the same unit with Brent Kopaka? Not at the same time. They missed each other by a couple years there, but now, and they weren't just part of the same 82nd Airborne. They were part of the same unit within the 82nd Airborne, same paratrooper unit back when he was a paratrooper, before Brett Payne became an MP and became an officer, right? Nonetheless, these things are interesting to me because why do these decisions get made? Why is Gooch's dad deep into the military intelligence world with Paul Tate relative to the Manson murders here tonight? And why is she the one questioning Dylan Mortensen when both of these folks have deep connections to pioneering Mormon families, the Mortensons and the Gooches? So makes you wonder, because again, Dylan Mortensen can do no wrong despite the vast number of conflicting statements and very, very suspect activity. Suspect activity that may in fact include LARPing as a college student, faking being a college student, LARPing as a sorority member of Phi Beta Pi chapter. She has no problem going back to a year after the murders, partying, dancing, taking photographs, and continuing to make, by all appearances, be a member of that sorority. Anyhow, folks, hope you enjoyed Manson Family Style Murders, Parapolitics, and the Idaho 4.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, but check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.